He changed the world, not by building machines, but by making them feel human. A man who fused art with technology, simplicity with power, logic with emotion. To millions, he was a genius. To those who worked with him, he was impossible. This is the paradox of Steve Jobs, the dreamer who demanded perfection, the rebel who built empires, the visionary who was fired from his own creation. He wasn't an engineer yet. He redefined engineering. He wasn't a designer yet. He became the most influential designer of his time. He could see what others couldn't, not just what technology could do, but what it could mean. The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. Jobs lived by that line. He believed that computers were not just tools, but extensions of human creativity, a way for ordinary people to express extraordinary ideas. But behind his brilliance lay contradiction. He was spiritual yet fiercely competitive, charismatic yet often cruel, a perfectionist who rejected compromise, even when it cost him everything. No one loved the intersection of beauty and function like he did. No one chased simplicity with such obsession. So who was Steve Jobs really? A prophet of the digital age, or a tyrant of innovation? A man seeking control, or one searching for meaning? To understand the force behind Apple Pixar and the revolution of the modern world, we must go back before the fame, before the turtleneck, before the legend, to a young boy in California who refused to accept the world as it was. Because for Steve Jobs, different wasn't a word, it was a destiny. Steve Jobs was born in 1955 in San Francisco, the heart of a generation that would later redefine culture freedom and the meaning of creativity. He was adopted at birth by Paul and Clara Jobs, a humble couple who couldn't offer wealth, but gave him something more valuable: love and permission to think differently. From the very beginning, Steve questioned everything. He wasn't easy to raise nor easy to teach. He broke rules not out of defiance but out of curiosity. He once said, "The minute you understand that everything around you was built by people no smarter than you, everything changes." That realization became his first act of rebellion, the belief that systems exist to be challenged. At home, his father taught him the art of craftsmanship. Paul Jobs, a mechanic and carpenter, showed his son how to make the inside of a product as beautiful as the outside, even if no one would ever see it. That lesson would shape Steve's obsession with detail for the rest of his life. In the garages and backyards of Silicon Valley, young Steve spent hours tinkering with radios, engines, and circuit boards. But while the other kids focused on how things worked, Steve wanted to know why they mattered. He wasn't interested in technology for its complexity. He wanted to find its soul. As a teenager, he met Steve Wozniak, shy, brilliant, and equally fascinated by electronics. Together, they began exploring what machines could do for people. They built blue boxes that hacked telephone systems not for money, but for fun, proof that technology could bend the rules of the world. The two Steves were opposite halves of one mind. Wozniak saw circuits. Jobs saw possibilities. The 1970s were an age of rebellion, a time of hippies, Eastern philosophy, and spiritual exploration. Jobs dove headfirst into it. He dropped out of Reed College, choosing instead to audit classes that fascinated him, like calligraphy design and typography. He walked barefoot across campus, slept on friends' floors, and collected Coke bottles for food money. But what he gained was something priceless, a sense that beauty and purpose were inseparable. "If I had never dropped in on that calligraphy class," he said later, "the Mac would never have had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts." He traveled to India seeking enlightenment. He studied Zen Buddhism, shaved his head, and returned to California with a new conviction that simplicity was the ultimate sophistication. The spiritual calm of the East merged with the restless energy of Silicon Valley, and something inside him crystallized. He realized that true innovation doesn't come from intelligence alone. It comes from intuition, from seeing patterns others can't, from feeling what others ignore. By his early 20s, Steve Jobs was a contradiction in motion, a dropout with vision, a rebel with focus, a dreamer armed with discipline. He wasn't searching for a job. He was searching for meaning. And soon, in a small garage behind his parents' home, he would find it in the form of a circuit board that would become the seed of a revolution. Because from the very start, Steve Jobs wasn't trying to build computers. He was trying to build freedom. It began in a small garage on Crist Drive in Los Altos, California. No offices, no investors, no marketing team, just two young dreamers, a handful of tools, and a belief that technology could be personal. In 1976, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak built their first computer, the Apple I. It was simple, raw, and hand-assembled on wooden tables. Wozniak focused on the circuits. Jobs focused on the experience. He saw what few others could, that a computer could be more than a machine. It could be a friend. "The computer is the most remarkable tool we've ever built," he would later say. But like all tools, its value depends on the person who uses it. Jobs convinced local retailers to sell the Apple I. Then he persuaded investors, and soon what began as a hobby became a company. He named it Apple, inspired by his time in an Oregon apple orchard, a symbol of simplicity and warmth in a world of cold machines. Apple's growth was explosive. In 1977, the Apple II arrived, sleek, colorful, and unlike anything the world had ever seen. It was the first computer truly made for ordinary people, not engineers, but dreamers, artists, and families. Apple went public in 1980, and overnight Steve Jobs became a multimillionaire at just 25. But wealth was never the goal. What drove him was the pursuit of perfection. He poured his soul into creating the Macintosh, a computer that would merge art and science. He wanted it to feel alive, not just functional, but human. He demanded impossible things from his team, shouting one moment, inspiring the next. For Jobs, good was never enough. "Real artists ship," he said, meaning that creativity only matters when it reaches people. In 1984, Apple unveiled the Macintosh with a commercial that would become a legend. Directed by Ridley Scott, it declared, "1984 won't be like 1984." The message was clear. Apple was not just selling computers. It was challenging conformity. The Macintosh was beautiful, revolutionary, and years ahead of its time. But behind the applause, cracks began to form. Jobs' relentless perfectionism clashed with Apple's executives. His vision, once a source of inspiration, became a source of tension. He wanted to change the world. They wanted to manage a company. Still, in that brief moment, Steve Jobs had proven something extraordinary: that technology could make people feel. He had turned a garage into a revolution, a startup into a statement, and a circuit board into a canvas for the human spirit. The world saw him as unstoppable. But soon, the dream he built would turn against him, and the visionary who changed everything would lose everything. Because in the story of Steve Jobs, creation and destruction were never opposites. They were partners. In 1985, at the height of Apple's success, Steve Jobs lost everything. The company he built from a garage had grown into a global empire, but the empire no longer wanted its creator. His passion, once seen as vision, was now called volatility. His intensity, once admired, had become unbearable. After months of power struggles, Apple's board voted him out. At just 30, the man who had changed the future was told he no longer belonged in it. "It was devastating," he later said. "But it was also the best thing that ever happened to me." For the first time, Steve Jobs found himself without a company, without a team, without a purpose. He disappeared from headlines, but not from ambition. Instead of giving up, he started again. He founded Next, a new computer company built around a bold idea that technology should serve education, creativity, and human potential. Next computers were beautiful, elegant, and far ahead of their time, but they were also expensive too, advanced for the market to follow. The company struggled. Still, Jobs refused to compromise. He poured his obsession into design: black magnesium cubes, perfect symmetry, typography so precise it bordered on art. "We don't do things to make money," he told his small team. "We make money to do things." While Next floundered financially, another of his ventures quietly took flight. In 1986, he bought a small animation studio from George Lucas, a studio called Pixar. He saw what no one else did, that computers could tell stories, not just solve problems. 10 years later, Pixar released Toy Story, the world's first fully computer-animated film. It was a masterpiece. Critics hailed it as revolutionary, and just like that, Steve Jobs, the man who had failed in business, became a legend in cinema. Pixar didn't just succeed, it changed storytelling forever. But the greatest plot twist was still to come. In 1996, Apple, the company that once fired him, was on the brink of collapse. Desperate, they turned to the one man they had cast aside. They bought Next, bringing Steve Jobs back to the company he had created. He returned quietly at first, then began to rebuild everything, not just the products, but the soul. "I feel like I'm back home," he said. From the ashes of defeat, a new Steve Jobs emerged. Wiser, calmer, sharper. He had learned humility from failure, beauty from pain, and purpose from patience. He no longer chased success. He chased meaning. And in that shift, he would create something greater than Apple's past, a rebirth that would change how the world connects, listens, watches, and dreams. Because Steve Jobs didn't just come back to reclaim his company, he came back to reinvent life itself. When Steve Jobs walked back into Apple in 1997, the company was dying. Profits had collapsed, products were scattered, and the once great symbol of innovation was only months away from bankruptcy. Most people saw a lost cause. Steve saw a canvas. He didn't just return to save Apple, he came back to save its soul. He began by doing what few leaders dared to do, dozens of products, hundreds of projects gone overnight. He wanted focus, clarity, and purpose. Deciding what not to do, he said, is as important as deciding what to do. Out of that discipline came a philosophy that would define the new Apple simplicity, not as minimalism, but as purity. Every product would have a heartbeat, a purpose, and a story. He surrounded himself with believers, designers, engineers, and dreamers who shared his obsession for excellence. Together, they built not just devices, but experiences. In 1998, Apple unveiled the iMac, a translucent, candy-colored computer that looked nothing like anything else on the market. It wasn't just a machine. It was art. It said, "Something new. Technology can be joyful." The world took notice. The iMac sold millions, saving Apple from collapse and reigniting its creative fire. But for Jobs, that was only the beginning. He wanted to put music, movies, and communication into people's hands to build a bridge between technology and the human spirit. In 2001, he launched the iPod. 1,000 songs in your pocket, he said with a smile. It wasn't about storage or specs. It was about freedom. The freedom to carry emotion, memory, and rhythm wherever you went. Then came iTunes, which revolutionized the music industry, changing forever how we listen, buy, and share. Apple was no longer a computer company. It was a cultural movement. People don't know what they want until you show it to them. That line became his mantra and his gift. Steve Jobs didn't follow trends. He created desire. Every curve, every sound, every box Apple shipped was designed to evoke a feeling. He pushed his team to exhaustion, demanded perfection in every detail from the click of a button to the packaging of a product. It wasn't madness. It was devotion. Because to him, technology was poetry. Apple rose again, more powerful than ever, its logo transforming from a brand into a belief, a symbol of creativity, rebellion, and human potential. And at the center of it all stood Steve Jobs, the man once fired from his own dream, now shaping the dreams of millions. But his greatest creation was still ahead, a single device that would put the world inside our hands, and his name into history forever. January 9th, 2007, San Francisco. The lights dimmed and Steve Jobs walked onto the stage in his black turtleneck jeans and sneakers, the uniform of a man about to change the world once more. He spoke softly, with the confidence of someone who already knew the future. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. In his hand, he held a small black rectangle, elegant, seamless, almost alive. It wasn't just a device. It was an idea made real. The iPhone. In that moment, everything changed. The keyboard disappeared. The screen became the interface. The world's information, communication, and creativity were now within a touch. The crowd gasped. The press cheered. And Steve Jobs smiled not out of pride, but out of certainty. He had seen this moment long before anyone else. Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything. And he was right. Within a few short years, the iPhone reshaped entire industries: music, photography, communication, even human behavior. It became not just a product, but a companion, a mirror of the modern soul. Apple's empire soared beyond imagination. The iPhone, then the App Store, then the iPad, each one rewriting how we lived, worked, and dreamed. Under Jobs, Apple wasn't selling gadgets. It was selling possibility. But behind the brilliance, something else was happening. Steve Jobs was running out of time. His body was failing even as his ideas flourished. Diagnosed with a rare form of pancreatic cancer, he fought in silence, driven by the same force that had always defined him, the need to create. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. He continued to work through the pain. Meetings, launches, designs, nothing stopped. He poured what was left of his strength into ensuring Apple would outlive him, embedding his philosophy into its DNA. When he introduced the iPad in 2010, his frame was thinner, his movements slower, but his fire burned as bright as ever. He held the device up with both hands, smiled faintly, and said, "It's the best thing we've ever done." The audience didn't know it yet, but this was a farewell in disguise, a final gift from a man who had given the world so much more than technology. He wasn't trying to build the future anymore. He was trying to leave it behind. In those final years, Steve Jobs held the entire world in his hands, not just through his inventions, but through the legacy of his vision. He had connected billions of people, turned machines into extensions of emotion, and made art out of circuitry. But even as his products grew smaller and sleeker, one truth grew larger than ever. What he had truly built wasn't a company. It was a culture. One that believed in thinking different, dreaming bigger, and living boldly. On October 5, 2011, the world went silent. Steve Jobs, the visionary who saw the future before it arrived, was gone. He left quietly, surrounded by family after a long battle he refused to let define him. But his absence echoed loudly across the planet. Stores dimmed their lights. Strangers left flowers outside Apple stores. Millions mourned a man most had never met, but somehow knew. Because Steve Jobs didn't just sell technology, he gave people a way to express who they were. He turned design into language devices, into emotion, and simplicity into art. To him, simplicity was never the lack of something. It was the perfection of everything essential. Simple can be harder than complex. You have to work hard to get your thinking clean, but it's worth it in the end, because once you get there, you can move mountains. That was his religion: clarity, in life, in work, in vision. From the garage in Los Altos to the stages of Cupertino, Jobs built more than a company, he built a culture of rebels, dreamers, and believers who dared to think different. He showed the world that technology could be both powerful and poetic, that circuits and glass could move the human heart. Even now, long after his passing, his fingerprints remain everywhere, in the glow of a screen, the curve of a design, the way a product makes you feel before it even speaks. He once said, "We're here to put a dent in the universe, otherwise why even be here?" And he did. But perhaps his greatest legacy isn't the iPhone or the Mac or Pixar or Apple itself. It's the way he taught the world to see, to care about the invisible, to find beauty in simplicity, and to never settle for less than extraordinary. In the end, Steve Jobs' story was not about machines. It was about meaning. A story of a man who sought perfection not for ego, but for elegance. Who faced death not with fear, but with focus. And who reminded us all that innovation is not the pursuit of more, it is the pursuit of better. He taught us that simplicity is not emptiness. It is clarity. It is truth. And long after the screens fade and the devices evolve, that truth will remain whispering to every creator, dreamer, and believer. Stay hungry, stay foolish,